this contract was left in the intervention fund account. Let me again make it clear that the funding of the first half of this particular contract, that is the initial payment of 1.5 billion naira, actually came from the soft loan provided by Rivers State Government. On the issue of the 2 billion soft loan, let me also say this. The money had been spent out the money that had been spent out of that 2 billion before I came into office can be accounted for by my predecessor. I only got 1,633 million naira out of that money. The balance of 350 million was applied by my predecessor before I came in. I applied 1.5 billion out of it, and I left approximately 133 million naira in the accounts. The documents are attached and will be tendered. Number 2, the second contract was the extension and national outreach servicing of runway 18LR36R of Murtala Mohammed International Airport. That is the domestic runway. We awarded the contract at 3.5 billion after approval by the Federal Executive Council was granted. After the council approval, and document is attached, FAN wrote to us and made an application for 50% payment immediately so as to ensure that the contract was finished quickly because the rainy season was coming amongst other things. We approved that application and consequently we paid 50% of the cost, that's approximately 1.8 billion to Mrs. PW Nigeria Limited. This contract has also almost been completed, well they say 75%. And the balance of the price, that is 1.7 billion, was left in the intervention fund account for payment to the contractor upon completion of that contract. The third contract that I awarded was the cargo apron expansion of Murtala Mohammed International Airport, won by Fiat International at approximately 850 million. This contract went to council, it was approved, and all due processes were followed, documents attached. Again, FAN wrote to us asking for 50% upfront payment. This amounted to approximately 426 million naira. On the grounds that the project should begin before rainy season started so that it could be concluded quickly. The request was granted and the 50% was paid to the company by FAN. The contract is still ongoing and the contractor is still on site. The balance of the money, that is 426 million naira, was left in the intervention fund account and it should be released to the contractor upon the completion of the contract. 4. The fourth expenditure was not a contract, but a refund for contracts that FAN already executed and paid for with their own money before I came into the ministry and in respect of the ICAO Audit 2006. ICAO is a specialized agency of the United Nations which was created to promote safety and orderly development of the international civil aviation throughout the world. It sets standards and regulations necessary for aviation, safety, security, efficiency, and protection of the aviation environment throughout the world. The ICAO Safety Oversight Audit 2006 was one of the main reasons that the Aviation Intervention Fund was set up. Documents are attached, and that's a very important piece of evidence that was one of the reasons it was set up. The Intervention Fund was approved by Mr. President for, amongst other things, the funding associated with the preparations for ICAO and to enable FAN carry out all the required principal projects associated with and in preparation for the audit. Unfortunately, the Intervention Fund was not released on time for the audit. As a result of the delay in releasing the expected Intervention Fund, FAN, under the supervision of my predecessor in office, Professor Babalola Borishade, decided to utilize its own funds, which are meant for other projects, staff welfare and pensions for ICAO critical projects. As a consequence of this initiative taken by FAN, and as a consequence of their sacrifice, Nigeria scored 90% in the ICAO audit. This was very encouraging and was a great success and morale booster for the aviation sector in Nigeria and the nation as a whole. According to FAN, the projects executed totaled 1,315 million naira, documents are attached, out of which the sum of 772 million naira was paid by FAN, leaving a balance of approximately 543 million to be paid to the contractors. Again, the documents are attached, Mr. Chairman. It is pertinent to note that all the contracts, ICAO critical project contracts, were all awarded and executed by FAN before I came in as the Minister of Aviation and before the ICAO audit took place. Consequently, these contracts would have got the relevant approvals from the Board of Directors of FAN and the Ministerial Tenders Board. On the 4th January of 2007, FAN wrote to me requesting for a refund of 772 million, which was paid to the contractors, and a balance of 543 million, which was yet to be paid to the contractors who executed the ICAO critical projects, and also a sum of 144 million for the outstanding payments to Julius Berger for the maintenance of the Abuja airport from the Intervention Fund. A follow-up request was made on the 17th of April. The Managing Director of FAN and his Director of Finance came to the Implementation Committee and told us clearly and categorically that if this money was not refunded immediately, the whole parastatal and aviation sector will come to a standstill because they could no longer pay staff salaries, which almost resulted in a strike. They could no longer maintain their airports, they could no longer execute safety critical projects at FAN, such as the water improvements of Lagos Airport, the replacement of the 2.33 kV PHCN feeders to the airport, etc. and they could no longer honor their obligations to contractors that were offering critical and daily services to them. This critical financial problem bedeviling FAN was compounded by the fact that FAN's internally generated revenue was affected drastically by the fact that FAN was compelled to pay 222 million naira a month to Zenith Bank for a bank loan given to NAMA for its Safe Tower project. That arrangement was made before I came into the ministry. Consequently, FAN was severely cash-strapped. We were told that if this situation was not addressed quickly, it would certainly have resulted in the total closure and breakdown of our airports with its attendant consequences. Consequently, in order to avoid a disaster, and after further consultation with the Aviation Implementation Committee, the amount of 1,315 million naira was released as a refund to FAN for the ICAO projects that it had previously funded and executed. A further 144 million was also released for previous work done by Julius Berger, as they had also openly threatened to stop work at the airport if they were not paid. However, in my approval for these refunds, I clearly minuted that, quote, due process and due diligence must be followed. The fifth expenditure was spent on the local content aspect of the Safe Tower project. The contract had been awarded long before we came to the ministry to Amsterdam, Vienna and Abuja, and approximately 6.4 billion naira had been spent by my predecessor. However, there was a local content aspect of 74 million, which was released specifically for the completion of the control tower in Abuja and in Lagos airports. Captain Ado Sanusi, the DG of NAMA, and the Chairman Project Implementation Committee, Air Vice Marshal Oluga, applied to me specifically asking for the release of this money, and they told me that these funds were for the physical and structural repairs of the control towers in Abuja and Lagos. The total of the local content was 300 million, but we released only 74 million of the 300 million. The documents are attached. I'm tendering it, Mr. Chairman. Releasing 74 million ensured the completion of the Safe Tower project in both Lagos and Abuja airports, and they were both operational before we left. 6. Release of funds to various committees. Presidential Implementation Committee. As a consequence of a letter from the SGF's office, the then SGF, the Secretary to the Government of the Federation, Chief Ufote Kaite, stating clearly that the funding of the Presidential Implementation Committee on Aviation is the responsibility of the ministry or government agency. I have attached this document, Mr. President. 34 million naira was released to the Presidential Implementation Committee in order to allow it to do its work effectively. This money was released from the intervention fund due to the fact that the committee was charged with the responsibility of assisting the minister in the implementation of the Paul Dike report and the application of the intervention fund. 34 million naira was released as the budgetary allocation for the operation of the committee. This involves their expenses for logistics, sitting allowances, subcommittees, traveling meetings, etc. It is important to note that this money, which was released about 1.5 years ago to the Presidential Implementation Committee, is still being used by them till today. The Ministerial Committee.
Excuse me. If there's any other specific things you want to read out, go directly. Okay, all right. So I'll summarize the rest. Yes. I will read this bit. Please, just go directly.
I think you've been very generous.
Yes. You have certainly been very generous. I will not read the rest. I'll just.
Your low points now.
Okay. This is a very important issue. I think I'll just.
Yes, it's important. You can read that.
Yeah, thank you. This is an important. My predecessor in office, Professor Babalola Porishade, gave an approval that 506 million naira should be paid to a group of consultants who had done some work for FAN on the issue of airports in the country. This money was to be paid from the intervention fund based on his earlier approval. Subsequently to a further application and representation from FAN to me, and after consultations with the Presidential Committee on Aviation, I approved that the money be released to FAN for that purpose. Consequently, 506 million was approved and released to FAN for re-engineering, which included airport fencing and outsourcing program from the intervention fund. However, upon my insistence that due process must be followed, which was clearly minuted on the approval that I gave, before this money should be released to the relevant consultants, the Director of Finance of FAN, Mr. Jerry Onifade, pointed out to me that he could not trace due process in the award of this contract. This clearly showed that it would have been wrong for us to pay the consultants the money they were claiming, which had been approved by my predecessor, Professor Babalola Porishade, and then later on by me. Consequently, I directed the Director of Finance of FAN and the MD of FAN that under no circumstances should that money be released to the consultants. As a result of my directive, this money was still intact and safely in the bank account of FAN at the time of my departure. I would urge those that are running the ministry now to direct FAN to pay that money, that's 506 million naira, back into the intervention fund account forthwith. Unfortunately, all this information about lack of due process concerning this contract was brought to my attention just before I left office, and had I remained in office, that money would have been returned to the intervention fund account immediately. The issue of the loan, I think we've dealt with that, the issue of the loan or grant, but just for the record, I won't read it. Just for the record, Mr. Chairman, let me say that